Hey guys, Rob here. Just wanted to say, as I was editing today, that we have come across a couple of audio issues that we had whilst recording. I fixed them as best as I can for you, and hopefully you'll still enjoy the episode. Thanks, guys.
We made it this far. I'm Liam, this is Rob, and welcome to the Hey Guys podcast. This week, we look back at one of the most groundbreaking movies of the 80s, one that has had a huge impact on both popular culture and the world of digital art and creation. Steven Lisberger's Tron might not have revolutionized cinema back in 1982, but its impact and legacy has remained ever present for more than 40 years. As important as it was and remains, however, this movie wasn't a massive part of my youth. It's become more important as I've got older. But even when I was a kid, the big issue with this movie was that it always looked a tad pony. Rob, I think there's a lot of good in this movie, a lot that it does very well. But the visuals remain a massive barrier.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the premise is a fantastic premise. It does a lot well, as you said. The story may have a little bit of work for it, but they weren't really concentrating on the story so much. It was more the computer-generated graphics for them at this point. But yeah, you're right. It hasn't held up. And to be fair, it probably lost its luster towards the late 80s. I mean, this was filmed, 1982 or released in 82.
Released in 82.
So a couple of years later, it's probably going to lose its luster. Now, the one thing I've never actually done on this podcast is I've given Star Wars its due. But Star Wars still holds up.
Yeah.
Filmed in the 70s, you've got the graphics, things like that, with the lasers and the light swords and all that stuff. Still holds up.
Come on, light swords, really, dude? Come on.
But when you look at this, yeah, it gets a bit, as you said, I mean the word you used was pony. A lot of the graphics that are using. So the chase scenes seem okay, but when you get the actual people in there acting like the programs, they're dressed up in their cloth outfits, but they're meant to be programs. So when when they move and you can see it's cloth and things, it's all.
Yeah, I mean that's more of a budget constraint, and that's more actually, I guess, an artistic design choice because they could have put them in different.
I would call it a design constraint because
Sorry,
wants to happen. In 1982. This was so far out there for 1982. It's such a batshit premise. Let's go inside a computer and show what it's like inside a computer. But yeah. I mean, they had the reason why this probably didn't do too well when it first came out was because not many people knew computers back then. So they're talking about bits and bytes and megabytes and everything like that. I mean, you know for a fact that some of the language they were using, they were unsure of as well because they didn't need to keep calling it the Master Control Program. You called it that once, that's fine. Just call it Master Control.
Yeah, they kind of go a bit overboard with that. And it's interesting looking back at like the original reviews for this because a lot of them like celebrate the visual design in this film and the actual CGI because nothing like this has been seen before on the big screen. And we mentioned the fact that it doesn't hold up, and it didn't hold up pretty soon after release. But at the time, that was celebrated, but the issue a lot of people had was that the plot was incomprehensible. Now, when you go back and rewatch it now, you're like, I don't really see what the issue is. There were issues with the plot, especially in the third act, but nothing is particularly incomprehensible. But you've got to remember, in 1982, most people had just no connection to computers whatsoever. They kind of just thought of them as, either supercomputers that the military used, or they were video games. And that's the genius of the narrative of this film, is that basically they use video games as a way into the world of supercomputers and combine the two. But to bring it back to the visuals briefly, I mean, when I was younger, I would have watched, or I was aware of this at least in like the late 80s, early 90s. It already looked rough then. And I had a real issue with it in so much that I thought it looked kind of lame in like the late 80s, early 90s. The one thing it benefits from now is that we're so far removed from it and it looks so bad by modern standards. It just does. The visual, the computer graphics are so limited. It's almost beyond compare in terms of what they were able to achieve back in '82. It's the most simple of lines. But what it has become is oddly iconic and memorable. So it's become charming, if nothing else. So I can't even look at this. Like we've gone back and watched certain '90s movies and said, "Oh man, the visuals really don't hold up." This is so far beyond that, where it's like, of course they don't hold up. It was CGI in 1982 that it just becomes oddly charming, I think.
And it's done that full circle thing where it's being watched now for not what it was originally released for. Mm-hmm. I suppose the only thing, and this is going to be a random comparison, the only thing I can compare it to is The Room by Tommy Wiseau. Sorry, Tommy Wiseau. Where that was filmed in his mind as a love story. But when you look at it, everyone watches The Room now for basically because it's a terrible movie. Mm-hmm. You watch Tron now, not for the reason why it was released, which was for the graphics or anything. Like you say, it's come full circle. It's more now for the nostalgia as well, mm-hmm. and to see what they did or what they could do with what they had. To bring it back to what you said about, I mean, we only briefly mentioned the story, where people had an issue with the story back then. Mm-hmm. They couldn't follow it. I mean, it's such a basic story. It's there's nothing really to follow. It's about a guy who got kicked out, then manages to get his way back into the machine, to go to the one computer terminal that's right next to a laser, which I would have queries with anyway. Why is that laser pointing at this computer terminal? Maybe...
Yeah, no, there's two things going on at the same time, because...
Yeah, but then, he gets taken into it, and then, like I said, and then he finds out what's going on. He finds his evidence and comes out. It's not really a story that you need to follow. It's so simple. It's so one-track minded that there's nothing. The story was always second fiddle to the graphics and the way it looked. The visuals is what I want to say. Mm-hmm. But the one thing I noticed when I rewatched it this time about the visuals, my God, it's blue.
Like, it is blue. It is incredibly blue, but to bring it back, I think there's two lines of thinking in terms of the plot is very basic. You obviously got the plot back on Earth in terms of him getting sucked into the computer, and then it becomes basically an escape story, and that's pretty much it. They're against the clock for one reason or another. But what it is massively ambitious is in terms of the themes that it kind of like portrays, like this stuff, gods amongst men, like the users amongst the programs, all that is kind of really hinting at like a religion, that is being created in this world. The overarching narrative is about overthrowing the dictatorship, the loss of personal freedoms. It's as much about rebellions as revolution as it is digital motorbikes. But it's all kind of like, they wanted to, obviously, because they're dealing with the visuals. And I mentioned before, we say something like Avatar. Obviously, that was completely cutting edge, but this was cutting edge in its own way in '82. And that because they were trying to build this world, which to many of us was incomprehensible, and they were trying to kind of really put you in the world. The story was very simple in Avatar, and it wasn't, I think, when James Cameron was making that film, he was fully aware that he was making Fern Gully just the CG version. But he didn't want to kind of take anything away from the experience. He didn't want to overcomplicate things. And I think that's what they were doing here. So you can dig a little bit deeper and look at the underlying thematic building blocks that are in place here, but they're only kind of hinted at. They actually go into it in a bit more detail in the sequel, Tron Legacy. But here it's just kind of like little hints in the world, and you can take as much as you want from it. But if you want to just keep to the core plot, yes, it's very straightforward. But as we mentioned earlier, while a lot of it seems very straightforward to us because we all have a basic understanding of computers now. Back in 1982, like you said, even stuff like RAM, CPU, all these things, like I have no idea what the fuck is going on here. None whatsoever. They just threw the audience in at the deep end in 1982, and it's like a sink or swim situation. And it's probably a large reason for the fact that it did okay at the cinema, but it was never the mega hit it was supposed to be.
We watch films completely different. We've said this previously. Like, you're watching it for the themes and everything, gods and monsters and all this stuff. And I'm going, oh yeah, the story was lame and it was blue. Like, I love how we watch films so differently. And I think that's why you fixate on these films such as Avatar, Star Wars, all these films where you're looking deeper into it. And I just look at these films and go, it's shit. James Cameron's a fucking prick. Stop making films. Like, don't pull a face like that. You know it's right. Like,
Well, it's not, but okay, fine.
But that's what I mean. And the reason why I love doing this as well is because we get two completely different views. But also, I say maybe 8 times out of 10, we always wind up in the same place about how we feel about these films and what we got out of them, things like that. Like, when I was watching this as well, it was really, really, my nostalgia was kicking in straight away. Because like you say, this film was dated even back when I first started watching it. I was born in 83, so it came out before I was born. So when I first started watching this, okay, yeah, it was really good to watch. But then straight away then it starts to get dated, as I already said, like the 90s and stuff. So I was kind of expecting it to be a bit lame when I rewatched it. I still had fun with it. And do you know what I think that was? Jeff Bridges. But Jeff Bridges from before he goes in. Jeff Bridges before he goes in is so charismatic.
Yeah.
What was his name in this?
Well, it's weird. Flynn. It's an odd thing that you say that because he is charismatic, but I actually think he's a bit of a douche as well. Like, he very much feels like the precursor to the likes of Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, and like Musk and such. The only difference is back then the world was still run by old guys in white stuffy suits rather than, the young white guy in the t-shirts and trainers. Like, basically he's the person that ends up, ruling the world 20, 30 years later. And actually by the end of this film, that's the position he's in. And make no mistake, like, he's sold as the hero of this film, but he's in no way altruistic. He's there to, make money. He feels like he's being cheated out of it. He wants to run the company.
I'm not too sure I'd call him douchey. I do think he's...
Dude, he's a sleaze, I think. And don't get me wrong, I think he gets away with it because Jeff Bridges is so likable.
I mean, Jeff Bridges is charismatic. He's enjoying what he's doing, but then he kind of takes a little bit of a back seat. But then nobody actually comes to the forefront when they go into the digital world.
It's weird you say that because if you look at the posters, Jeff Bridges is nowhere to be seen. It's all Bruce Boxleitner and Cindy Morgan as Tron and Yuri. They're the ones on all the posters for these films. And I think everyone nowadays, they associate this film with Jeff Bridges. But even the modern posters, like when they've redone it for re-releases, it's still Tron and Yuri. And I think it's just because they have that iconic pose and look. But I always find it strange that he's the star, but in terms of the advertising, very much pushed to the background.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is he the star? Or was Bruce Boxleitner not a big name? Because the film is called Tron, so it's about the security program Tron, or it should be. But it's not, is it? It's about Flynn.
I think Flynn's still the star, but I see it's almost like we did Stargate last week. And we were mentioning about, is this a Kurt Russell film or is this a James Spader film? And the answer is it's actually a little bit of both. And I would say the same is true with this. It's just Tron's character and Bruce Boxleitner, as an actor, maybe just isn't as charismatic or as memorable as Jeff Bridges. So
it's not a fact that isn't.
He isn't. No, he isn't.
He really isn't. Bruce Boxleitner is not as charismatic.
He's also not playing as interesting a character, on both sides of the computer.
I wouldn't have thought he could carry the film anyway.
No, probably not.
No way he's carrying a film. So that you get a name like Jeff Bridges. I don't know how big a name Jeff Bridges was in 1982. I'm assuming he's
been around for a bit. I mean, he's a relatively big star.
He just done Lightfoot with Clint Eastwood, or was that after?
Yeah, I think that might have been just before. Starman was probably a couple of years after this, but this is when he's kind of come into the forefront. And he's not a young man in this; he was already in his kind of mid-30s. So yeah, he was clearly the star of the film. But again, I think just they weren't selling this as a star vehicle; they were selling this as a CGI vehicle. In the same way, again, you get they weren't putting Sam Worthington on the front of Avatar. It was they wanted the blue cat people
bringing up that fucking film.
Well, it's just a modern comparison. That's all that is. But you know what I mean. They're just well, this is what we're selling. We're not selling this as a Jeff Bridges film. We're selling this as a CGI visual kind of something completely new, and that's what the posters are selling.
I would love to have seen it. We said it about films like The Thing and things like that. Okay, we got to rewatch them, which is great. But to watch them on opening day or opening week or wherever it was, I wonder what this would have been like in the cinema back in the 80s.
It's weird, isn't it? Because it's kind of like, and some things age better than others, but you know, if I was comparing it to video games, like I have a very vivid memory of seeing and playing Mario 64 for the first time. And because it was so new, you know, we had seen 3D games, but nothing like that in terms of, you know, a 3D console game with something recognizable. And you were saying, like, this feels like a quantum leap. And while that game still remains good, visually, it's aged out pretty dramatically. But at the time, I remember being like, I can't believe this is a fucking thing. And I can imagine for a lot of people back in 1982, simply on the basis that you have nothing to compare it to. You're like, well, this just looks unlike anything else. So you almost can't be too critical of it because there is nothing to compare it to. It was completely its own beast back in 1982. Yeah. And as I said, you know, for all the issues...
2023, and you won't stop comparing it to fucking Avatar.
I do like Avatar. But even like today, as limited as the visuals are, as I said, like a lot of it, the reason it works is that it's mega iconic. The light cycles are super, super iconic. And, you know, and an easy thing to forget as well is the stuff in the real world is actually really beautifully shot, you know, especially with like the city, and they, you know, they kind of shoot it like circuit boards. Yeah. Like a lot of that stuff, especially if you're watching this film in 4K, looks absolutely amazing in 2023. There's one shot in particular where it's the NCOM helicopter at the start of the film. So it's going over the city at night, and it's covered in blue, kind of like I don't know, neon lights going around it. That shot looks absolutely amazing. Looks like it could have been shot yesterday. But of course, then it's kind of offset by the moment you go into Tron, you're like, no, not into Tron, into the computer. It looks bad. And
what I said. This film is so blue from start to finish. This film is blue as fuck.
Blue, grey, and red. I'm surprised they went with grey for the characters. Yeah. Like they all look like they're in purgatory, just like a neon club version of that. It's quite strange.
Let's go back a minute, right? Let's go away from the visuals and everything, and just start talking about the characters and the actors and things like that. So David Warner, who plays Ed Dillinger, the Master Control Program, and he played the other character. I can't think of it. Razik or something like that. Was it?
Sorry, David Warner. He played Sark Dillinger, and he was the Master Control Program.
So he is only senior VP, right? So is Dr. Walter Gibbs his boss? But is he the kind of boss who just wants to hide in the lab? So he lets him run the day-to-day. Which is fun, because he doesn't seem like a guy who would promote somebody like Ed Dillinger, who, by the way, Dr. Gibbs, only realised on this watching, I heard his voice when I watched it before I saw his face this time. It's fucking Grandad from Lost Boys.
Yeah, I totally forgot. But the issue for me with all of this, and before we go any further, is the fact that David Warner, as the old white guy Dillinger, was my age when they made this. The dude in the suit at the table, the head of business, you know, the big bad, well, not the big bad guy. The big bad guy is the master computer, I suppose, but he also plays him, was 40-fucking-1 when he made this. Dude, I thought he was like 60. People just aged differently. But no, like,
dude,
it's one of the, it's another one of those. What's that?
There's a dude from Titanic with the gun.
Oh, dude, I always just remember him as the, I think just the evil guy. I'm not sure if he's even got an actual name, from Time Bandits.
Okay, yeah, I've only seen Time Bandits one. I'd like to redo that.
Oh, again. He's fucking awesome at that. He's so good.
Titanic, the dude with the gun?
Yeah, he's the dude with the gun. Yeah.
Okay. And that's the best I've seen that film once, and I won't watch it again.
Yeah, but I mean, he's good in this, and he's good in most things. He's just one of those actors. Whenever he pops up, he tends to be very good. I was just absolutely appalled when I found out he was.
I mean, it's really mad. It's mad, isn't it? And it's because of generations and things like that. But that dude was 40. You look at him, and when I was watching this film, I was probably 7 or 8. You look at him and think, "Fuck me, he is an old man."
Yeah.
Now you look at people who are 40, and. It's, my God.
Well, he still looks like an old man.
He looks like an old man, but we're 40 now, and I would say we look. I'm not trying to big us up, but I wouldn't say we look like him. And I don't know if that's because obviously,
no fucking way do I look like David Warner in this film. No way, and that's not me bigging myself up. It's just I'm 41 and I don't look like a 65-year-old. That's all that is.
I wear shorts, I wear hoodies, I got tattoos, things like that, and that's probably something that's going to go on until like in the 60s and stuff. Seeing this generation's version of an old person is going to be absolutely insane compared to my generation. It always goes like that.
Yeah. Like, you see it with footballers stuff all the time. If you watch clips of footballers, especially from like the 70s and stuff like that, and you're like, that dude was 25 and he looks like 48. It's absolutely bonkers.
Sorry, it's the same with when you see the old school rugby players as well, like scoring tries in the 70s and stuff like that, and they just look like they'd go down the pub for a fag during half time.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Well, that's a big part of it, isn't it? They would just live in a very different lifestyle. But yeah, it's odd because David Warner obviously is the big bad of the piece, but Flynn, like I said, he just wants his job. Like, Flynn is a classic capitalist who has been screwed over by Dillinger and wants his piece of the pie. That's basically the plot as far as they're concerned. Obviously,
I think you're looking at too literal, though. It's not that.
The film ends with him getting out of a corporate helicopter.
The film ends with that because he is now getting his just desserts. I get that, but this guy stole all 5 games from him, and then used that to rocket onto to springboard his career.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah, because he ends up in the computer completely by accident. Like, that he ends up in an adventure not of his making. Like, he falls into a world where there's a pre-existing conflict going on, and he just kind of flukes his way through it. And basically, at any one point, all he's really trying to do is get out of there. And the issue, one of my big issues with the film, is that they do try and build a commitment between Flynn and the characters in this world, but they all fall completely flat on an emotional level. Like, Ram's death scene should have been impactful. Instead, it was just really weird and bad. I'm not sure, like, it was a combination of bad writing and bad acting, but that scene didn't work. And there was the bit where Yuri briefly kind of dies, and he brings her back to life with his power, user powers or whatever it is. And again, it happens too quickly and it has no emotional impact whatsoever. So it's a bit of a shame that that connection between him and the computer programs all falls a bit flat. So, this idea of him kind of being built up as a messiah, which I think they're trying to go for with the plot, never actually goes anywhere. And it just feels like he's just trying to escape back into the real world. And as you say, get that one piece of paper, which magically proves everything. Dillinger, as soon as he sees that on the screen, he's like, well, I guess I'm done. It suddenly feels like an episode of Scooby-Doo when, you get a bunch of teenagers say, oh, we know you did this, and they just give themselves up immediately. It's like, dude, I'm pretty sure you've got, at least solid lawyers. Fight this for at least a moment. Jesus Christ, Dillinger.
It feels weird that Walter Gibbs would promote somebody like Dillinger, though, and not even listen to Flynn. It feels, if Walter Gibbs is the guy who's in charge, it feels weird to me.
But it doesn't feel like he was in charge because I think actually maybe, and you do get this with like these big tech companies. That was part of the story of the whole, the Facebook thing and everything, is that you had 2 guys who basically created this together. And he's put him in a position of power, and then he's turned into some evil corporate douchebag. And he still wants to live in that world of like working out of our garage and stuff. And he's still obsessed with the tech, but he's put him in this position of corporate power, and now he can't get rid of him. So he ends up kind of like answering to this guy who he used to trust, but has turned into a corporate douchebag now. So that was kind of what I got from it. But like so much else in this film, it's really only touched upon.
Yeah, it's
which is a bit of a shame. It's like I said, there's thematically there's some interesting stuff in this film, but everything is hinted at rather than dealt with in any meaningful way.
Did you notice as well? Because who Ram was in the outside world?
No. Who's that?
It was the Alan, can I eat your popcorn guy?
Alan. Oh, Jesus Christ! That was such a weird scene. Was that what that was for? Just so you could say, like, the camera's on him long enough to go, oh, look, it's that guy. He's also in the computer world. See, I didn't notice that was him, so I just thought the fucking popcorn guy was a lunatic. I was like, who has to eat someone's popcorn in the office? It was, I just thought it was a really odd point in the scene.
There's nobody else in that office. Wait till Alan leaves, just steal his popcorn.
Yeah, it's a very strange move. But one of the biggest issues I actually think with this film is the third act, and it's a similar issue with actually Tron Legacy, in so much that you get all the build up, all the world building. And then once you kind of get to the denouement of the film, it all just kind of doesn't really go anywhere. Like, just as I'm getting used to the visuals and kind of accepting them as being kind of old-fashioned but iconic, you get the whole ship thing with the laser beam. Yeah. That's never quite clear what they're trying to... And then, sadly, you get the reveal of the master computer program, which is, in a film where the visuals don't hold up, the design for the master computer program is laughably horrendous. Oh, who the fuck not to give him nostrils. It's a bad choice.
I mean, that whole ending was a bit strange because it wasn't so much as well. I mean, the Master Control program did look stupid, but then
yeah, it does.
You had what was his name again? Who Ed Dillinger, David Warner played.
Oh, Sark.
Sark. I keep forgetting that.
Sark. Sark. Sark.
So Sark, when he turned him into Godzilla as well, that was.
Yeah, that was true. It was odd because Sark's death via frisbee attack, whatever it is, was actually pretty surprisingly brutal. Because one of this movie's greatest achievements is that it fundamentally makes frisbeeing look cool. Frisbeeing isn't the coolest sport, but it looks pretty badass in this film. And for the most of the film, basically people die by falling over. It's like, yeah, they're throwing a frisbee, but usually they're knocking away the floor because it's based around video games. But then suddenly with Sark, he throws the frisbee and it gets cut into his head. And I think they use kind of like a visual representation of computer code, but it looks like his brain is falling out. I was like, God damn, man, that is brutal. And like you said, it's quickly followed by giant Godzilla Sark, which again doesn't really have any impact.
Does nothing. He steps a couple times. Then Flynn kind of jumps into Master Control's brain. And then creates an opening for Tron to take him out, and it turned into that old dude chess program thing. It was really
that was really odd as well. The whole chess program thing at the kind of the bottom of the Russian doll thing. I mean, I thought it was already pretty weird. Like Dumont, when he was like the Tower Guardian, and he was kind of stuck into the floor. I was like, I don't quite know what they were going for there, but some of the costume design in this film is pretty sick. Like the guard you mentioned, the fact that they have this kind of cloth padding, it doesn't look particularly futuristic. It just looks a little bit lame. But there are a few odd choices. Like I think the frisbee thing works, the light cycle totally works. But then you get, like, of all the sports they could have picked, and I think they kind of had, is it Arkanoid, the game where you have to destroy all the blocks? That's basically the game he's playing at the end when he's fighting the master computer or the master computer program. Yeah, that's the one.
It's basically
why did they pick? I think I found the sport Jai Alai. You know when he has the wicker kind of cestus on his hand. Of all the kind of obscure sports to reference in this film, I thought that was a really fucking strange one.
I guess it looked good because you could be further apart, and then the ball as well could be neon, so it was bouncing. But I mean, have you ever seen?
There's nothing less futuristic than wicker kind of myths to me. But
have you ever seen a game of Jai Alai?
Yeah. Is that how it's pronounced? Sorry.
Yeah, Jai Alai.
Yeah, Jai Alai. Sorry,
it is.
I murdered that. Then my apologies.
It is absolutely insane. It is so like broken bones. Like because that ball is coming off because they throw it on a wall and it comes back and you've got to catch it, and it's going like 60, 70, 80 miles per hour as they try and catch it.
I can imagine the kind of leverage you could get on a throw with those is unbelievable. But I still thought, I start thinking now, it's like, could you have Tron cricket, Tron curling? Like, how obscure could you get?
I'm all right with highlights. Then when everything turns into a competitive frisbee, that's when it gets a bit weird for me.
Well, it's weird because that is like outside of the light cycles, which I think are the most iconic of all the kind of, if you're thinking of iconic imagery and things which immediately scream Tron, people think of the light cycles. And, again, even when I was younger and the visuals had kind of aged a bit, the light cycles were still ace. They were still awesome. And basically, it was kind of like a really cool version of Snake in many respects in terms of the actual game itself. But the frisbee is the second thing, and when I think of like Tron, I think in your mind, thinking back to it, you think of Tron Legacy, where you have these cool kind of like discs where it stores all their memory and all that jazz. But when you see it in this film, you're like, no, that's just a 1982 frisbee with a little swirl painted on it. That's it.
Funny when he was holding it and he's going, the key to everything is on this data disc, and I'm thinking, dude, when you were filming that, you're basically just holding a frisbee, probably with nothing on it.
Yeah, and it's not just a frisbee. It looks like the kind of frisbee you buy at like Poundland. That's the kind of frisbee it looks like. So.
I wrote that down. That's a hyper value frisbee.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. But that's the thing, though. That's what I think makes this film charming. But you've got to watch it in that way. You've got to get yourself into that mindset. If you're like going back to this film expecting it to be visually impressive, it's not going to happen. As I said, charming, sure, iconic, definitely. Ugly as sin, Also a big fucking yes, sadly. So yeah, it's a hurdle to get over. But as I said, once you do get past that, and it's true of, the best films, and this isn't an amazing film, make no mistake. As I said, it's ambitious in its own unique way, but the story does just kind of plod along from one kind of sporting event to the next. And then suddenly, the first half is kind of like the plot as you remember it. And then the second half suddenly becomes this larger narrative, which they've not dealt with. They haven't successfully put in place, about the kind of the revolution and the whole, the data privileges and all these, and the religious aspect about the way that the programs see the users. That is kind of pushed to the forefront in the final act of this film, but it hasn't been established in any meaningful way. So that's why I think the last act of this film kind of just doesn't feel like it goes anywhere.
Yeah, because they don't really delve deep into his user powers or the fact that he's the Messiah at this point. So
it's one of like 4, 5, 6 themes which are hinted at, but are then a given short shrift. And then even once they do kind of save the day and get back to the real world, fuck me, this film is eager to wrap things up. Like, they wrap up the kind of narrative within, 10, 15 minutes max? Yeah. It's like, it's just like, oh, everything's fine. Dillinger's going to jail. Flynn's going to be, the rich head of the company, and everything's going to be fine. It's a very naive, a very optimistic movie in many respects, especially when you look at, the world we're in today. But, I think that kind of adds to the movie's charms in many respects.
Yeah, totally agree.
Excuse me. But one thing I will mention before we move on is just how many successful predictions this film made, like about future tech and entertainment. Like, in this film, it has AI, cyberspace, all-powerful corporate nerds, digital identity, personal online digital data, the dominance of big tech. This was all in this movie decades before it became a reality. And as I said, there are these hints, this super interesting, mega ambitious movie, but realistically, it's just an escape movie at its core. So, the two worlds never quite meld, and it's a bit of a shame in the end.
You missed the other one that they've pretty much guessed as well.
What's that?
Well, I wrote it down as, did they have hooker programs? But the more I think about it, basically, they had their first version of YouPorn, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, it's weird because, again, there's just this little hint of the real digital world outside of the gaming world. Because obviously, all these guys are basically in prison. They've all been imprisoned by the master computer program. And there is just one scene where they basically get out into the real, when I say the real world, the digital world as it is for everyday programs. And like you said, there are hookers, and there's just kind of people just wandering around the street, and you get this slightest hint of this larger world, and then they just move on super quickly, and it's all forgotten about.
It's a Disney movie. They made hooker programs. It's weird.
It's crazy. It's a strange film, and you can see why they never known quite what to do with this film. It took nearly 30 years to make a sequel, and even now they're umming and ahhing about making another one. But I don't think anyone knows how to turn this into the mega blockbuster everyone wants it to be.
Well, yeah, I mean, a couple of things, but yeah, 28 years, and they shouldn't really make a third if they're going to have Jared Leto doing it.
I have very conflicted feelings about Jared Leto because I think he can be very good, but the problem is I don't think he's a particularly likable screen presence. So if you put him in the right role, I think he's actually a pretty good actor, and he's willing to take some, right from the start of his career, took some big risks. But when you're talking about leading man situations, I just don't think he's likable enough, and I think that's the major problem.
That's the issue, see, as well, because he shouldn't have been the leading man in Tron 2, but I really liked him.
Well, he wasn't the leading man in Tron 2.
No, let me finish.
I was going to say, sorry.
He didn't lead the man in Tron 2, but I really liked him in it, was Gareth Hedlund. But now the fact you had him in Tron 2, bring him back for Tron 3. Why are you creating a whole new story with somebody else that nobody seems to like?
The problem with Gareth Hedlund, I like Gareth Hedlund, but again, I don't think he's quite got that it quality. Like, Jeff Bridges has got something about him. You can see why, you'd make him the star of this film and you bring him back for Tron Legacy. Gareth Hedlund, like I said, he's a likable screen presence, but what he doesn't have, which Jared Leto maybe does have, is the it factor. I was actually saying, like, what's the dude? God, you love him because he was on that TV show you guys all watch. From Pacific Rim.
Charlie Hunnam.
Yeah. He looks a bit like him, but he's more interesting. I know people have issues with Charlie Hunnam. I actually really like Charlie Hunnam, and I think, would I prefer him over Garrett Hedlund? Probably in this role. I think he just adds a bit more bite to it. But I think you need to bring in a big star for this film. But I just
Tron 3. And Tron 3 has Jared Leto, but it also has Evan Peters, Cameron Monaghan. So just get rid of Jared Leto. Evan Peters could carry the film. I think he'd be great at it. I mean, Cameron Monaghan is doing well at the moment, but just not Jared.
It was weird. Like, they sold the last one. It wasn't sold as a Garrett Hedlund film. It was sold as like the original 82 original. It was sold as this kind of visual spectacle, and a big part of it was the score for that film. Like, a lot of people were going for that Daft Punk score, no doubt about it. But we'll get to that in Legacy anyway. Do you have anything else to add before we move on to favorite scene?
Check my notes. I think I've covered the most. Yeah, no, I'm all good.
Cool. So for my favorite scene, I mean, I mentioned it, I do love some of the shots of the city that make it look like a circuit board, and the NCOM helicopter scene really does look legitimately fantastic. But the kid in me still loves the light cycles, because that is, as I said, the iconic imagery when I think of this film. Like, the suits, you can get rid of the suits. You know, they moved on from the suits for Tron Legacy, and rightly so, because they look a little bit naff. But the light cycles, the design, like the beams coming out the back, it still looks ace. And to me, it's still fundamentally Tron in my eyes.
For me, it's the arcade.
Oh, dude, how did we not mention the arcade? You're absolutely right. It is the arcade.
When he rocks up to the arcade, and just everything is just so nostalgic and old school, and it's absolutely fantastic. So for me, it's the arcade. That's my favorite thing.
That was kind of like a look into the future as well, because when I was younger, I remember thinking, it's like, arcades aren't like that. You know, they're quite kind of nerdy places in many respects, or you get one at like a fairground or some shit. But in Flynns arcade, people are drinking by the looks of things. It's almost like a party atmosphere. But now there are, video game bars. Like, that's a big part of not a big part of modern culture, but I've been to, NQ64, places like that. It's a bar and an arcade, and they're selling it on that kind of vibe that it's almost a little bit rowdy. And that's maybe the closest thing to it. But Flynns arcade is absolutely bad. Like, from the exterior, the building itself, to the actual arcade machines, because they might be some of the most iconic arcade machines of all time. You know, when you think of like Defender and fucking Pac-Man and stuff, like, they just still look the business today.
It's absolutely, yeah. And to be fair, I would have been all right with just making money in that place. Happy days. What more do you want?
Well, he obviously wants more. As I said, I told you, dude, Flynn's a greedy bastard.
Only a bastard because Dillinger fucked him over.
Dude, he wants to get paid, dude.
If you use your he used his IP to get paid. That's
right. I would believe what you said if the final scene of him is back in his arcade with all his little nerdy friends, him playing games happy. No, the final shot is him on the roof in a helicopter.
Because
corporate douche.
He offered him the keys to the kingdom. I think anyone would take it at that point.
He was keen as fuck. In terms of loves, number one, I've got the aesthetics and the design. As I said, the visuals themselves don't hold up from a technical and practical level, but they're still memorable. There's a reason they've lived on, and it comes down to the core aesthetic and the design that kind of underlines the technology that was built over the top. Number two, the ambitions of the narrative. We already mentioned it's a bit of a shame that the film isn't built on stronger foundations, and that core plot never links up with the themes building in the background. But they're still very interesting, and I think that's another reason why the movie has been able to live on, because there's so much to work with there. There was so much to expand upon, which sadly isn't expanded upon in the movie itself. And number three, Flynn's arcade, as you already said.
For me, Jeff Bridges. Number two is Flynn's arcade. Number three is the visuals. I think 90% of the time it doesn't hold up anymore, but I think it still looks great. It was fun to see. Would I go back and rewatch it again? Not for a while, but it was fun to see the visuals, see what they did for 1982. They weren't doing anything like this back then. And
like you said, though, in terms of going back, there's no danger of going back and it's suddenly looking bad. It already looks bad. It's not going to look any worse in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. You know, that ship has sailed. We've moved beyond it. It just looks naff, but it also is oddly fun.
It goes to show as well that they didn't do anything like this after it. So it was basically a one-time thing, and as you said, it took 28 years to do a sequel to this. So
it was one of those odd, like, design dead ends. it was kind of like its own unique thing, but then nothing came of it. And maybe it was because it wasn't a massive box office hit. But to your point, like there's nothing else that looks like this film. Nothing. It was like this came out in 1982, and then visual effects and design went in a completely different direction. So it just exists in its own evolutionary dead end somewhere, which again makes it oddly unique and entertaining to go back to.
Yeah.
In terms of hates, number one, Master Control Program looks fucking horrendous. It just like, because that's not an issue with like how like age technology. The design is just bad. As I said, I still can't believe they gave it nostrils. I don't know what they were thinking there. Number two, the third act falls completely flat for me, sadly. And number three, the emotional beats. I already mentioned earlier, Ram and Yuri, all that stuff. It just doesn't land at all. And this isn't a hate, but I was really conflicted about, as I said, the Jeff Bridges performance. I just think it's weird. It's not a bad. I wouldn't put it in good or bad. It's just a weird performance, but interesting all the same.
For me, everything about Master Control Program, the fact they used the words Master Control Program over and over again, kind of did my sweet in. The way he looked, the fact he was able to have this much control from being a chess program was really, really weird to me.
Yeah.
Number two, the story. The story was pretty lame. Like it was just so one track minded. It just in regards to it was just following simple beats, but they were concentrating more on the visuals than they were the story. And number three, Tron. Tron just seemed pointless. Like with a film called Tron, it just you seem to there was no build up to him, even though they mentioned Tron program a lot. Then he was given this a really important job with a frisbee. He did it, and then I don't know. He didn't seem to hold enough of my attention for me to like that character.
Yeah, it was like this weird kind of like plot device which almost wasn't required. Like, I guess they were trying to sound as this like super, program because it was like a hacking program almost, wasn't it? To kind of get into the system. But he was trying to get to Alan, but then, obviously Flynn is also trying to get out of the system. So the kind of two narratives intertwine. I'm not sure if they're both required, but yeah, he just kind of he's both completely essential and oddly inessential at the same time. But yeah, I know what you mean. In terms of other, well, what have we got on to next? Alternative titles. Are there alternative titles for Tron?
Yeah, there are a few as it goes.
Are there really?
Yeah.
Jesus.
But
I thought this would be fine because it's like a made-up word. So I thought it just, it's like Tron everywhere. Obviously not.
I'm not too sure if you have I'm not too sure if there's an issue with translation, right?
Okay.
Because obviously Tron.
Yeah, you always have to take these with a pinch of salt. So yeah.
Well, in a couple of countries, Argentina, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Mexico, others, it's called Throne.
Okay. Which kind of leans into the more thematic nature of the film. I think that, as I said, it's a revolutionary film at its core. So Throne kind of makes sense.
Yeah, but I wonder if that's why, I don't know whether Lithuania translated it into English and then translated it into their own language, because, and then it was translated from Lithuanian to English again, because it's called High Chairs.
Yeah, that does sound a little bit literal. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm buying that. Like, it's been a mistranslation which is being fed back through the computer and is with High Chairs. Yeah. Dude, it can't be High Chairs.
Hungary, Tron, or the Rebellion of the Computer?
Fine, I suppose.
Is it Tron or the Rebellion of the Computer?
Or.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that doesn't work. If it was like Tron hyphen the Rebellion of the Computer, that would work, but not Tron or the, you can't have an or in the title of your movie. That just doesn't make any sense. What is it, dude? Make your fucking mind up.
They were so unsure what they were doing.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus.
Spain, Tron, the Electronic Warrior.
That's fine.
Taiwan, the Battle for Supremacy in the Electronic World.
Very wordy. Very wordy.
Although again, being literal, I think Vietnam probably were taking a bit too much speed or LSD at this time, because they just watched this film and went, fuck me, I'm high. Let's call this Psychedelic Games.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I'm surprised actually that in like the US, considering, as you mentioned, there would have been an issue with like the understanding of the concepts, the core concepts, just in regards to computers, because they just weren't in people's homes back in 1982, that they didn't call it Tron hyphen computer battle or something really on the fucking nose to be like, well, this is what it is.
Oh, sorry, I missed Brazil. Tron, an electronic odyssey.
That's not bad, actually. I don't mind that. You can imagine that being like a spin-off video game for sure. Any facts for this game? The only one I've got quickly, and apologies if I'm stepping on your toes here, but this film was criminally disqualified from the Oscars special effects.
That's my
because the use of computers was considered cheating. It actually won other Oscars. I think it was like costume design and one other. I think it won 2 Oscars. But obviously, in any other year, it probably wins for visual effects. But yeah, disqualified for using computers. Who would have thought?
I feel like you just stole the best one, but I'll move on.
Yeah, sorry, man.
While the film was a commercial failure, the arcade video games based on it proved to be a tremendous hit and actually outgrossed the film.
Yep.
The state-of-the-art computer used for the film's key special effects had only 2 megabytes of memory and 330 megabytes of storage.
Crazy. Absolutely bonkers.
Yeah. To inspire the actors, arcade games were placed on the production set and could be played during downtime. Jeff Bridges apparently was the most adept at the games and found it hard to tear himself away from a game to shoot a scene. Jeff Bridges produced too much of a bulge in the crotch area in his computer outfit, so he was forced to wear a dance belt to conceal it.
Oh, what a treat that must be. Dude, your dick's too big. Oh, my goodness.
I wondered why he's got the whole...
Yeah. Can you imagine if they said that on set? Hey, excuse me, could you say that so everybody could hear you? I'm sorry. What are you doing, Jack? Oh, sorry. Dick's too big.
Yeah.
Dick's too big,
Is that? I always wondered why he had the sash. I don't know if it was to hint that he was a user, but no.
Yeah. No. Just because he's just packing heat, apparently.
Tron is also a debugging command in the basic programming language, meaning trace on. However, Steven Lisberger has stated in interviews that he took the name from the word electronic and did not know about the basic command until later.
Yeah, and it is probably worth mentioning why you bring it up, because we've not mentioned Steven Lisberger. He created Tron, like he created the characters and wrote the screenplay. That's why he ended up directing this film, because he had made Animal Olympics in 1980. He did Hot Pursuit with John Cusack in 87 and Slipstream in 89. So he hasn't got this massive kind of list of memorable movies, but he's completely connected to Tron. And that's why he was involved with Tron Legacy as well as a producer, because he created this entire world and ended up directing it, and much of the technology that you end up seeing on the screen as well. So I just thought we should throw that in because we didn't get around to it in conversation.
During the Encom exterior shooting, where the giant door was, and that was a big fucking door, there had been a radioactive spillage near the shoot. Cindy Morgan even stepped in a contaminated area and had to have her shoes decontaminated.
Fantastic.
You're talking. Sorry. You actually stepped in radioactive material. So can we decontaminate your shoes? You can have them back. Also, Jeff Bridges, your dick's too big. Can you put this belt on?
It's a lot to deal with in this film. A lot to deal with.
Due to the poor return at the box office following this film and its predecessor, The Black Hole, Disney Studios did not make another live subject film for 10 years.
Wow. Yeah, because this film wasn't a flop, but it just didn't make anywhere near what they were hoping for.
This one is fantastic because this is a no-shit Sherlock one. Those are actual frisbees that the characters throw around within the game grid.
Yeah. I fucking know it is, dude. It was so clear when he holds it. It's like they're trying to make it look important. Well, they posit that it's important via the dialogue, but visually, there's nothing important about it whatsoever. They just don't make enough effort to make it look like anything other than a cheap frisbee.
According to Comic Con Quest in 2010, Cindy Morgan traded a Yori costume for a Lexus.
Bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. But hey, man, I'll take the Lexus personally.
Yeah. In the scene where Sark strikes the program, he is talking with to the floor, the Pac-Man gub sound is used.
Yeah, well, you actually see him up on screen briefly. I'm not sure if you noticed it, but when Sark's looking at the screen, and it's just basically a bunch of dots and stuff, because it's like a tactical layer or whatever. So just before you hear the Pac-Man sound, you can see Pac-Man up on the screen.
That's it, because you see Mickey as well, don't you, in a shadow on the ground.
Yeah. I heard about it. I didn't notice it when I watched it, but I heard about it afterwards. But I did see Pac-Man at least.
Again, no shit, Sherlock. This was the first film to make extensive use of computer imagery.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Uh,
But it was, like other films had used CGI, but this was the first one to incorporate long sequences. So that was what kind of made it stand out from other films. Because, CGI shots went back to, was in 1975? I think it was Westworld was maybe the first one to actually use CGI on the screen. And that was the mid-70s. But
one of the first ones to use special effects.
Yeah. But this was the first one to really make it an important part of the movie rather than just kind of like a gimmick added on top, I suppose.
There's loads. I'll end it there because
cool. In terms of legacy, I guess the best place to start is the aptly named Tron Legacy from 2010. A similar issue to this film, both movies were moderate critical and commercial successes. I already mentioned earlier that I'm a big fan of Tron Legacy, or more specifically, similar to this film, I'm a big fan of the first half. The final act, I think, of both films have an issue. The difference with Tron Legacy is that it really leans into the thematic issues we talked about. But again, I think it actually gets so caught up in those that it loses track of the plot. So I think somewhere between the original Tron, which keeps the emphasis on the somewhat simplistic plot, and Tron Legacy, which has a larger influence from the thematic nature of the world, I think somewhere in the middle of those, you can still make the perfect Tron movie. So maybe that'll be Tron 3, which, are they still actually making that? I mean, you looked into it earlier. I know Jared Leto's supposed to be in it, but it feels like it's being pushed back numerous times.
It's pushed back again to 2025, so I wouldn't hold hope.
I wouldn't, especially the way Disney is at the moment. This was different. Like when they were talking about this in 2018, 2019, everything they were touching was turning to gold. Everything was making $1 billion at the box office. Things are looking very different now, and Tron still feels like a risk to me, and I just don't think Disney are going to make that risk. So even if it does say 2025, I wouldn't be surprised if we either don't see it for a very long time or perhaps never see the third Tron movie, which would be a shame because
there was a live action television series as well in development for Disney Plus. They shelved the project. Tron just seems to be that lame horse you don't want to keep betting on, but they seem to do loads of things that come out, as you said, because I don't know, sorry if I'm stepping on toes, but you get you've had lots of cartoons. You had Tron Uprising, I think. What was his name? Frodo was the voice of that. Elijah Wood. He was in Tron Uprising, and then there was I think you've already said that Tron video game 2.0.
Well, I think the reason for that is because I think a lot of people creating stuff, creating these movies, people working at places like Disney, for instance, have that connection to Tron. And as I said, despite its failures, relative failures, it did have a huge impact on popular culture. Like I mentioned, it was so far ahead of its time. And, it clearly had a massive effect on stuff like The Matrix. Sure, they've gone in a different direction in terms of the visual design, but the narrative is actually very similar, although, done in a less simplistic way, I suppose, in The Matrix. Like John Lasseter once said, without Tron, there would be no Toy Story. Yeah. So a lot of these creators clearly have that connection to Tron. You can see why so many people would look at Tron and say, I could do something so interesting with that world, because visually it's still interesting. And as I mentioned earlier, thematically, there's so much to potentially work with. So I can see the draw from a creative perspective. I just don't see the draw from a commercial perspective. And I think that's the reason it's going to stay on the shelf, sadly, which is a bit of a shame. I noticed you only see Bit a couple of times in this movie. The little thing that kind of flies around his head, he flies around with Clue at the start of the film, and then flies around with Jeff Bridges' character later on in the film, but then largely disappears. Clearly, the influence for a Ghost in Destiny, the video game, that is. I'm not sure if you've ever played Destiny, the video game.
Voiced by Peter Dinklage.
Yeah. They have to be based on that. It's so similar in terms of design.
Right, with Bit. Didn't know Jeff Bridges was a user, or because
I think he assumed it was Clue again.
Yeah, but why would he assume it was Clue again? Because they're programs, they're not faces.
Yeah, but the world seems to be built around kind of very human rules. I noticed one bit in the film where, he squints. And it's well, why should he have to, why should, poor eyesight be an issue in this world? It's kind of like the classic line in The Matrix. Do you think that's air you're breathing? Nobody, people do get out of breath in this film. So it's a computer world, but it seems to be built on human kind of, the real world in terms of the laws of physics, etc.
I think Bit should know that's not his program.
Yeah, Bit probably should know that, but we're assuming that he didn't know. So God knows, to be honest. I guess on the kind kind of large scale, the saddest aspect of its legacy is that Tron's ultimate dream of digital liberation and a purer sense of capitalism has since been completely lost, with a small number of companies ultimately holding all of the digital creativity and power, with the irony, of course, being that Tron itself is owned by the now all-powerful Disney. As I mentioned, the movie itself is like a little bit too idealistic for its own good, and in the modern world, this narrative I just don't think works, but it does make it very much a kind of like an enjoyable time capsule to revisit on so many levels, both in terms of visuals and in terms of what it's trying to do narratively, I guess. The other thing, we already mentioned the poster, the fact that it has Cindy Morgan and Bruce Boxleitner rather than Jeff Bridges, but do you think that the Matter digitizer was literally moved directly from this to the set of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
Thank you. Yeah.
Has to be, right? Like if it isn't the same thing, I refuse to believe that it wasn't a direct reference to this film. Like, it even works in the same way, right?
Well, pretty
well. Just instead of shrink, it just digitizes them. That's it.
Yeah, and the whole digitizing thing is fucking weird as well. Like, how do you take something from the real world and put it into a computer?
I tell you what, though, in terms of all the visual effects in this film, that's maybe the bit that's aged the best. I still think it looks kind of cool.
No, that looked dope. I did have to question why it took so long with one laser to digitize all parts of him, and then when it got right to the bottom of his foot, it then split into two lasers.
Yeah. It's like it just didn't make sense to it, really. Never mind.
I reckon I'll the kids as well.
In terms of making a change, so this is the part of the show where we basically decide if you could change one thing and one thing only about this film, what would you go for? And I know we could talk about the visuals and stuff, but for me, it really would be refine the third act, because I think that's where the movie falls down, sadly. So yeah, I won't go into the finer details. We've already covered those, but yes, refine the third act. I'm going to stick with that.
Yeah. So I mean, I got two. So the first one would be give Tron more to do. Mm-hmm. Because it's called Tron. So maybe,
yeah, it's fair enough.
Maybe make Tron the actual, and I know he's the one that saves her at the end and things like that, but he kind of disappears for a while, comes back, disappears. Like, pick your horse and run with it. Tron.
They never make it clear, like, his powers, just the fact that he's really good at video games. It's the same issue with Jeff Bridges' character, and you mentioned earlier about, like, his user powers. He kind of just has a couple of user powers at the end of the film, but it's never really explained in any meaningful way. So, yeah.
Said it last week as well with Stargate, where they had too many narratives and they couldn't finish them all off. Mm-hmm. So it's the same with this. It's pick a horse and run with it, really. Yeah, I mean, I know you can't call it Flynn. The film is called Tron, but it just But my other one, my jokey one, would be, just to appease you, make the reason that Flynn is hacking in a bit better than just money, because you can't seem to get away from the fact that he just wants money.
Well, no, like this idea that he wants money, I think that's maybe like the heavy-handed kind of version of that narrative. But it's like, as I said, like he's not going there to save the world or anything. He ends up there. Like that's all. It doesn't matter.
They're not saving the world, are they? Like they're saving the digital world.
Yeah, but he's not trying to save the digital world. Like, he just kind of falls into it. It doesn't matter.
He's not trying to save anything, is he? Just, but nobody
save that paycheck.
Nobody knows this shit is coming. I mean, last you checked, that was a bloody chess program, as we've already said.
Well, the only one I know is Dillinger. And fair play. Like, the one thing that does look actually pretty cool is his like computer desk. That still looks pretty badass today, I think, actually. In terms of video games, you already mentioned famously the Tron spin-off video game made more money than the movie itself. There's actually been plenty of video games over the years, unsurprisingly, but many were actually released around the time of the movie, with discs of Tron coming to the arcade just a year after the original, and a bunch of home console takes on Tron arriving. They all arrived on like consoles. Like Intellivision had a bunch. It was Tron Deadly Discs and Tron Solar Sailor and Maze of Tron. Brilliant. They were all for the Intellivision, all released right after this film. Like, when they just like games would come out each and every year. So I think there were 3 Tron games from Intellivision, all in 1983, I think. But the Atari 2600 had a bunch as well. The Adventures of Tron, the Commodore had one. Journey to MCP. So you'd be quite happy with. But I think they did actually call it the Master Computer Program, sadly, rather than MCP. They still didn't shorten it for the game. But in terms of if I was going to have a Tron video game today, oddly, I think I'd go with something like Nintendo and have like a narrative board game a la Mario Party and build it around the Tron-like mini games. either that, or if we're going to go really simplistic, have Sega do it. And remember, we talked about Star Wars Arcade. You can still find in the arcade state where it's like 3 games based on each of the core movies. Basically, just have that. Just like there was like 3 stages, and they're based on one's based on light cycles, one's based on Magic Frisbee, and the other one's based on what's that sport you said?
Jai Alai.
Jai Alai, yeah. So I think I'll go.
Jai Alai coming out with.
It's spelled Jai Alai. How do you say it?
Alai. You don't say You don't say jalapeno, do you?
Sometimes, if I've had a couple of beers. I'm never going to get that right. I'm not going to try and say it again. But that's what I go for anyway.
To be fair, we're on the same narrative, but I think I've gone better. So I...
All right.
Yeah, no, too right. I'm shooting you out of the water with this. California Games. Epic.
Yeah, that is better. That is better.
You had, like, what was it, half pipe, foot bag, as they called it.
Yeah, that was kind of what I had in mind for the Mario Party version. I was just kind of trying to force it into a narrative board game, but that's probably not needed. It probably would be better just to do the California Games version. I think you're right. Yeah. But now I just kind of want to play California Games. I'm amazed they haven't tried to do a modern version. No,
I might have to get my my Master System out.
Well, I've got it on the Commodore 64 Mini, I think. And of course, the one game I played was inevitably the fucking hacky sack game.
Yeah, Footbag.
Is it called Footbag in it instead of that? Footbag. Fantastic.
So it's called, there's Half Pipe, there's Footbag, there's Surfing, starring Rippin' Rick.
Of course. There's rollerblading.
Yeah. BMX and Flying Disc.
Oh, Flying Disc, man. I fucking love that one as well.
Yeah.
Did a dog used to chase it, or am I making that up? Or
Flying Disc, just Frisbee.
Yeah, it was just Frisbee. Yeah. Just like boot sack, whatever it's called, is actually just hacky sack, but it doesn't matter. So that leaves us with scores and recommendations. And despite the fact that we've disagreed on a few things, I suspect we're going to be in a largely the same place here. So for me, it's pretty easy. It's still a 3-star film. The thing is, it's always been a 3-star film for me because it's never looked great. It still doesn't look great. But fundamentally, at its core, it's still quite an enjoyable film. So yes, it's a 3. And would I recommend it? No, I wouldn't recommend it because, as I said, it's too much of a hurdle, I think, for most folk. Like, you've got to be into genre movies. You've got to be into almost the history of it and stuff to kind of just settle with the way the movie looks. Because I think a lot of people will turn this on, see the visual effects, and just be like, nope, can't be fucking dealing with that in 2023.
So we're pretty much on the same page. I wouldn't recommend it either because of pretty much everything you've just said. But it's a 2.5.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, no, the reason because I think I gave Stargate last week a 2. And I'm not trying to compare it to that or anything like that. But I said visually this looks good. I still enjoyed watching it. I would probably watch it, not for a while, but watch it again. Whereas I wouldn't go back and watch Stargate again. And yeah, to be fair, it was fun, but I wouldn't recommend it. And it was... The story's largely forgettable, but you're not going to forget the visuals.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things. Like, this film has always been flawed. I don't feel like my opinion of this has massively changed to if we were rewatching this in like 1992, for instance. I feel like like the plot's flawed. It's narratively ambitious. The visuals are hit and miss. Like I said, 2.5 probably seems fair. I'm going to lean towards 3 just because I think it's quite a charming film in many respects. But 2.5 seems more than reasonable.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. So, what are we doing next week then, dude?
Do you want to watch a film starring Billy Zane, William Sadler, Jada Pinkett Smith, CCH Pounder, and Thomas Hayden Church?
Do I?
Like, there's some names in there, isn't there?
There are some names, and I don't actually know what film this is.
I remember a TV show back in the day. I think we would have watched it more as a cartoon first. Tales from the Crypt?
Oh, yeah, 100%. The Stephen King thing.
Yeah. So, Stephen King, I thought that was something else.
Tales from the Crypt. Didn't he do Tales from the Crypt? Like, wasn't it like a movie where it was like a bunch of shorts tied together? Am I mixing that up?
That's not. I know the one you're on about, but that's
mixed up.
Tales, is it, or Cat's Eye or something like that? So Tales from the Crypt was. Do you remember the cartoon? You had the Crypt Keeper.
Yeah.
And then you watch that stuff. Well, basically, they made 2 or 3 films of that, but they weren't.
Oh yeah, I remember now. They're in the same ballpark. Yeah, I know what you mean.
So they weren't shorts.
Yeah.
So basically, there was a film because you had Christian Slater, and I haven't even said the name of the film we're going to do yet. Christian Slater did Tales from the
Dark. Creep Show. I was thinking of Creep Show.
Creep Show, yeah. Because Tom Savini was part of Creep Show as well. Do you remember Christian Slater was in a film called Tales from the Dark Side, which again was the films, the three stories within it with an overarching narrative. Not overarching narrative. Well, I watched this film when it first came out in 95, and I remember really enjoying it, and I haven't seen it for a while, but I want to go back and watch it. So it's Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight.
Okay. Never seen that. Never seen it.
Have you ever heard about it?
No.
Obviously not, because you thought it was Creepshow.
So no, see, now you say it and I look at it, I remember like the TV show version and stuff. Like it did run for quite a while, Tales from the Crypt.
So the TV show.
But I was just, as soon as you said it, my mind immediately went to Creepshow. But as I said, if you look at the two visually, they're not a million miles away, I suppose.
No, unfortunately, it didn't do what it needed to do. We'll cover it in Legacy next week, because there should have been sequels, but they weren't. Then they ended up doing Tales from the Crypt. I think it was called Bordello of Blood, about a vampire bordello starring Corey Feldman. So you know how far that dropped.
Oh, Jesus Christ. No, never heard of that either.
To be fair, go in with an open mind. I'm not going to big this up. I'm not going to do anything else, but I remember thoroughly enjoying Demon Knight. So,
well, this certainly is a deep cut, sir. After a couple of like relatively mainstream movies, although saying that, we did do Gleam in the Cube a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, so
your choices have been relatively mainstream. I see. Yeah. From the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, apparently so. Well, I can't even comment on this because I know nothing about it, apparently. So I'm looking forward to, I'll give it a go. I love all those kind of like classic horror things. A lot of them feel like they're kind of built around like comic book design, going back to like the 50s comic books and stuff. Certainly Creepshow was anyway, which obviously I know a lot more about than Tales from the Crypt. But yeah, I'll certainly give it a bash. So please do join us next week for Tales of the Crypt. What's it called?
Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight, also starring Chasey Lane.
Jesus Christ. Well, if nothing else, it sounds like it's worth checking out for the cast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else to add before we wrap up?
Just the usual at the moment. It should be ending in September, so you won't hear from me soon. This might be the last one. But if you could vote for us on the listener's choice of the British Podcasting Awards, that would be great. We will put the information up on social media, but you can just Google British Podcasting Awards, look for the listener's choice, and just find us in there. That'd be great. Cool.
All right. I've been Liam. This has been Rob. You've been listening to Hey You Guys podcast. See you guys next week. Cheers. Oh, and before I forget, where can folk reach us if they were so inclined to?
Well, you can actually reach us on Hey You Guys 80s at Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. But if you want to send us a mail, do heyyouguys80s@gmail.com. Send us in your recommendations. Send us in your thoughts about any of the episodes. Just literally talk to us. We'll have a one-sided talk with you on the podcast.
Yeah. We're nice folk. Get in touch. But no, cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. Bye now.